everyone to the Dying to Know podcast. Today, our guest is author Elena Manis, who is the author of Soul Dog, A Journey into the Spiritual Life of Animals. Elena is an Emmy-award-winning journalist with a reputation as a rational-minded, skeptical investigator. Yet, after acquiring her first puppy, Brio, she found herself on an unusual quest to solve the problem of understanding and communicating with him so that she could develop a positive relationship and ultimately better behavioral expectations. The challenges, though, of connecting with Brio, who Professor of Buddhist Studies, the late Robert Thurman, referred to as her Yoda-like spiritual mentor, led Elena on an unexpected journey of consulting with a number of experts, including trainers, scientists, healers, and psychics. Welcome, Elena. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad to be able to speak to you about this topic. As you may or may not know from my website, my mission in doing this podcast of Dying to Know, along with the other content on the website and in my social media pages, is to look at our needs as humans to make sense of the world and our place in it, how it works, our purpose for being here, how to make sense of it all, since ultimately we all die. And I've looked at people's needs to know more about these topics, including discussions about the afterlife and communication with the dead, but it was mostly related to their connections with human loved ones who have passed, or the strong connection with others. So I was excited to have you as a guest on the podcast based on your book about your dog. And the reason I came to you was my brother recently experienced devastating grief when his Rottweiler, Rocco, passed. And apart from his wife, Rocco was his closest and most loyal and loving companion. And to me, my brother never seemed to be someone who would be a dog owner or a dog lover, but he bonded so closely with the dog that it hurt me to see him in pain over the loss. And he had religious beliefs that didn't allow him to believe that his dog had a soul or would be in heaven when my brother passed on. And he was devastated that he'd never again be with Rocco. So whenever I see books or videos about grief related to pets or dealing with a connection with pets, I pay attention to it on his behalf. And I saw your book, and I felt that not only did you have a message for my brother, but you had a message for this podcast audience about the topics people are interested in knowing more about. But instead of in relation to their human loved ones, maybe, as you call them, non-human animals, they would be looking for the same kinds of connection. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story with Brio? I don't want to go into a deep summary of the book because people can obviously buy it and read it, but tell us a little bit about how you and Brio came to be connected.
Brio came into my life as a standard poodle puppy. It was at a time in which I guess you could say I was in sort of a maybe midlife crisis. I had a very high-powered career as a television documentary producer, and was certainly a type A personality. I was trained as a journalist, did a lot of investigative journalism. So as you said, my training and bent was to be skeptical in order to really accept something as a fact and as truth. I needed a lot of evidence, multiple sources, as we say in journalism. But I had been in a car accident on a film shoot, and it sort of was a wake-up call. I felt, there's got to be more to life than this. Just working very hard and not having so much of a personal life and personal connections. And I'd always loved animals, and I'd been particularly taken by standard poodles. So I decided to get a standard poodle puppy. And at first, my expectations were not fulfilled. I really felt that I'd never had a dog, and I felt that I couldn't really connect with Brio. I felt that I was failing at this relationship in a way. So I, somewhat out of curiosity, but also desperation, decided to call up a animal communicator. Animal communicators are essentially psychics who believe they can understand the thoughts and feelings of non-human animals, because we people are animals too. So to make a long story short, that's launched me on a journey of really coming to a very profound and life-changing relationship with Brio. And I know we'll be talking more about that.
Thanks for giving us a little bit of an idea of how the book gets started, and we'll get a little bit onto where it leads you. So rather than summarizing the book, can you tell us what the key messages were and what your goals were in writing the book, what you hope that readers would get from reading it?
Yes, well, as I said, I felt that my relationship with Brio and my journey that this relationship led me on was so life-changing, as I said, and really profound. And my missions, I guess they were linked, but two missions. First of all, I had really come to the realization that other creatures, other animals, are not inferior to us. Science is now really established, and that they have consciousness, they have feelings, they have thoughts. And especially the statement by an international body of scientists several years ago established that they do have consciousness. So they are not, inferior pets to boss around and feel that we have dominion over, that we are better. They're different from us, of course. But I came to really realize that they're incredible beings in their own right, and they have so much to teach us in many ways. And secondly, I really am now convinced that they do have souls, and that's kind of leaping ahead in the story. But I had so many experiences with Brio that cannot be denied, extraordinary, that I never would have believed when I started this journey that I would be the person writing this book, or to have come to believe in extra sensory, if you will, psychic communication with a dog, or to really come to be convinced that there are other non-physical dimensions to our very existence. I mean, this whole experience really shaped my understanding of existence itself in a new way. And I wanted to convey that journey to other people, thinking maybe it would interest them and maybe help other people, for example, like your brother who had lost a beloved dog.
So before you had these kinds of experiences, were you in any way spiritual? Did you have spiritual or meditative practice, or even just beliefs about telepathy or psychic communication?
Not at all. I started in as a real skeptic. I had no experience with telepathy. I mean, perhaps maybe even subconsciously I had some spiritual bent, but I would never have described myself as spiritual. And I was not raised in a family that believed in organized religion. I think looking back, my mother was somewhat quite spiritual, but I did not come out of a religious background. And I didn't think of myself as spiritual at all. I thought of myself as more as a rational, intellectual, I suppose.
When I wrote my dissertation about these kinds of topics of what people believe related to the afterlife and communication with the dead. And when I was writing it, my colleagues were questioning me about, why are you writing about this? Don't you want to be taken seriously? They found it frivolous. And you wrote about having opportunities to do stories on this on national television, about what you were finding out and learning in your journey with Brio. I was wondering, did you have any concerns about how pursuing these topics might affect your own reputation or credibility as a journalist? And what kind of responses did you get from those stories?
Yes, I did have huge concerns. And I should clarify that I did do stories for ABC News in particular, in a way, for 60 Minutes also, touching on this area, but not anything personal, nothing about my relationship with Brio, nothing about my personal experience with animal communicators, but more in the guise as an objective observer. Animal communicators are kind of popular in a way, and even back then they were. A lot of people went to them wanting to know what their animals were thinking. So I knew it would be sort of a popular topic. I did those stories under the guise of an objective reporter. I did not present my personal opinions or present anything about my experience with Brio in those stories. And I purposely told no one Absolutely no one. So maybe one or two very trusted friends about my interest in this area and my experience with Brio, because I was worried about my career. I think rightly, probably. I think it would have damaged it at that point. Later in my career now, I did not come out with this interest in my personal beliefs until this book was published.
How did people respond to the stories that you did? Did you get positive responses?
Oh, yeah, I've gotten a lot of positive responses, certainly not from everyone. I suspect that there are many people in my business, the television world and production world, who probably still think I'm crazy. Maybe they don't say it. People who have had personal experiences of their own similar to mine spoke out and were very supportive. I mean, it was great for me to realize that there were many more people than I ever would have suspected who have had similar experiences like this with their animals, and a real interest in the possibility of telepathic communication, or whatever you want to call it, intuitive understanding of our animals. So in that sense, the response was more favorable and it was surprising to me that there was a whole audience out there of people who were really sympathetic to this story.
Well, now they must know, based on your book, that this was partly your experience. In my dissertation, I found that their theories of trust and belief say that we believe in things that resonate with our own personal experience and with what we find to be plausible, that we believe what is told to us by people we trust. So how did you, in your choices of expert, what led you to trust them or find them plausible, and does it correspond with your experience?
You mean the experts in the book?
The experts that you used related to Brio and communicating with him and understanding him and how to deal with him, whether it was, you had scientists who were helping you, or trainers who were helping you, but also you had the psychics who were telling you about Brio's thoughts and message for you. So what led you through the choices of experts and to try these solutions? Did your own experience relate to how you developed a trust in these people and their processes?
First of all, in terms of the scientists and experts, I really picked them in terms of, their areas of research with animals and experiments they were doing on animal cognition, animal emotions, and consciousness. That was at a different level than the question of whether non-human animals have souls, or this area of extra-dimensional perception, if you want to call it that, or telepathy. So the scientists, I chose somewhat more traditional measures, the quality of their research, et cetera. The animal communicators I chose, in the beginning, it was certainly trial and error. Initially reached out to people who had something of a name and or were recommended by other animal people who I discovered in the process of research, who thought these communicators were good. But ultimately, some I didn't continue with, and the ones that I felt most connected to and that they were most connected to Brio were the ones I continued to work with over a period of some years. And in fact, I'm still in touch with several of the primary ones I used. Then there was a whole other area of experts, so to speak, that came into the book, such as religious experts like Robert Thurman, told me about the theories in Buddhism about animals having a soul and they could reincarnate, either not necessarily back as dogs or cats, what they were originally, but Buddhism even believes they can reincarnate as humans, and vice versa, that a human can come back as a dog, say. So that was in a whole other area. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a personal thing where you decide what's plausible, what's trustworthy about the person. And I don't know if it was the reputation, or was there a feeling like, this makes sense, that maybe what they told you Brio was saying. I think in the book, sometimes you said things that they would tell you something that Brio was talking about, what he liked to do, like look out the window, I think was one of the things.
Oh, yes. There were so many experiences, obviously, you read the book, but that was the essential factor. If they told me something that they heard, quote unquote, or sensed from Brio, because they get information visually and, through sound. Not the Brio was speaking English, but the animal communicators would get, a feeling that they would then translate into human language, so to speak. But the main factor in deciding whether I would continue with an animal communicator and that I believed them was if they told me something that they got from Brio that there's no way they could have known. I mean, there were many instances about details in my house or details about myself even, or specific experiences it just blew my mind over and over, still does actually. As I said, I'm a skeptic and there was no rational explanation for how, in a material sense, for how they could have gotten this information. I mean, I told them nothing except his name and breed. Sometimes they wanted to know the dog's breed.
How did it change your connection to Brio when you started to work with these people?
Oh, well, as I said, I learned certainly that not just Brio, but other fellow creatures do have profound feelings and thoughts, so to speak. And in the sense, I came to really believe that they have spirit. I mean, it's so hard to use words for this, but I came upon the word presence that not only me, but other people who absorbed Brio, he had a quality that just kind of, as one person said, radiated out of him, that you felt there was a real being in there that had a wisdom and knowledge that perhaps I didn't have. And I never thought of him in later years as a pet, so to speak. He was my teacher, is my teacher still. I know, to this day, many people might think I'm crazy, but, I don't have any question because it's what I learned from him and the way in which I learned it defied rational explanation by ordinary means. And there was so much of it, so many experiences of the sort that I have to believe it.
So it sounds kind of like you talk about him as your teacher, almost like the way Robert Thurman described it, Yoda. Your Yoda was Brio. And so, sometimes psychologists talk about the idea of spiritual struggles and emotional struggles. And I know you had a traumatic accident before you got Brio. Did you feel any element of spiritual struggle that played a part in your relationship to Brio or your efforts to communicate and understand him, or even in the messages that you started to get from these psychics that were coming from Brio?
No, I don't think I felt spiritual struggle because, that was a whole new territory for me. I felt spiritual discovery, I guess I would say. Maybe, certainly there were times during my relationship with Brio, like anybody else, I have personal struggles, with work and relationships and, no question, I was going through those things during the time, he was physically with me. And even today, he grounded me. I feel he is my teacher and he opened up the spiritual world to me. He opened up the possibilities. And I would say for me, conviction that there are other dimensions of existence that aren't immediately obvious to us. I can't answer all these questions. I think Einstein said he's in love with the mystery of the universe. I think there are many mysteries of the universe, but I'm very open to exploring them, more open than I was, before Brio. And maybe, as I said, initially, there was something of that in me anyway. If it was sort of buried. I was very driven by my mind, not my intuition, rationality, all that. So I changed a great deal.
Do you feel like it was a different depth of understanding life rather than from the mental side? It became something more emotional, more connected to life?
Definitely. More emotion or ruled by intuition, emotion to some degree, but, less driven by the mind and material issues.
Well, you talk about that Brio still is your teacher, and Brio has passed at this point. And in the book, you do talk about seeking guidance from Brio after he passed from medium. So why look to Brio in spirit for this kind of communication? And have you ever worked with psychics or mediums regarding other people and loved ones that have passed in your life as well?
Okay, so I worked not only after he passed, obviously I was devastated because even though I did truly feel that his spirit endured, I just felt that. And I continued to get confirmation of that, through translations, if you will, from the animal communicators. So I didn't stop working with the animal communicators. They continued to sort of send messages from him that continued to defy rational explanation. They were so accurate. And again, there's no way they could have known that. So they were validating. I was certainly devastated, but I got validation that in some way his spirit endures. And I felt him. It was, I suppose in some ways the closest and most profound relationship I've had. Not that I dismiss human relationships, but it certainly was unusual. So, I feel, we're all connected. I have come to believe that all beings are connected. I'm so connected to Brio that he's a channel kind of, for my spirituality. So I did go to mediums. I went to one in particular that I still use, but it was about myself. Well, initially it was, to connect with Brio. I wanted to see what she would have to say in addition to the animal communicators, so to speak. And she also gave incredibly accurate and profound readings, as they say, from Brio. But it was not only mediums, it was the animal communicators also. So this connection endures. I don't use mediums or animal communicators all the time at this point, but I became a meditator. I am a meditator now, and I often feel Brio very strongly in my meditations. I'm not going to analyze what's going on, but I know what he is to me, what he means to me, and that somehow connects me to, I don't know what the word is. I'm not religious, so I tend not to use the word God, but God and the force of love. I get
Maybe
that,
a higher
power. I get to that place through Brio often, not all the time, but often.
Yeah, so it sounds like, now you are able to connect to Brio directly. Did you feel that these mediums and psychics kind of helped you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they helped you get to this place.
In the beginning, I don't think I could have done it on my own. I was a neophyte in many ways. So it was a journey. Brio lived to be 15 years old. So
have you ever used the mediums to connect with other loved ones, or was it mostly with Brio at that time because you were was it because you were grieving? Was it because, like you said, that you had this connection to him and that he was very meaningful in your life? Or was it more like you wanted to know that he still existed?
No, initially that was the reason. But, over the years, one medium in particular, I continued to talk to sometimes, and definitely, it's not that I ask necessarily, but, things come up about my mother, for example, that, this woman never knew my mother, doesn't know anything about my mother, but it's so not just accurate in a factual sense, but the essence of my mother. It's amazing. So, but there are factual details too that, I certainly never told her or anything like that.
So the title of the book is The Journey into the Spiritual Life of Animals. So do you have a summary idea or a kind of something that you felt that you took away of as far as what the spiritual life of animals is? I know you introduced it as that there is a connection, there is a certain existence that animals have, that it's not just a non-sentient being, but there is something spiritual to having animals in our lives. So what would you summarize it as?
Well, having them in our lives, my story, was spiritual because it brought me to a new understanding or experience of spirituality. But more importantly, in terms of why I, want to tell the story and maybe open other people's minds to who animals really are, is that I think, animals don't have verbal language. I mean, some animals, of course, have auditory communication, but they don't have verbal language as we do. So I think they actually have better access to intuition and some sort of sixth sense often than we do. On a very rudimentary level, but I mean, going beyond that, I mean, it's hard to put into words, but I always felt that Brio had a knowledge and a wisdom of truth, I guess I would say, in the real nature of existence. God knows what he knew, but you could sort of feel it. I mean, a friend of mine who was not ostensibly spiritual at all once said, you look into his eyes and you see the pyramids. It was just a feeling of incredible wisdom, I guess. I mean, exactly what he knew and what he saw. I mean, it's beyond me to totally explain that, but I really don't have any question that he knew things that I didn't know, certainly at that point. And I think that's what, a deep connection with an animal can bring to us, opening us to at least considering other ways to understand existence, our existence, the nature of existence itself and the universe. And I mean, certainly we don't have all the answers, but at least to bring people beyond the limitations of the strictly physical material world.
I think that's something that, we each come to in a different way, and that animals are, if you have that kind of a relationship with an animal, that can be the key for certain people to get there, to get to the point of like another depth of understanding and another level of experiencing life. Since you've written the book, have you heard from anybody, any of your readers, of any kind of interesting or profound experience or understanding that they came to, or what has been the response to the book?
No, I've heard a lot of those experiences, and now I'm actually working on another project about animals. So I've solicited more stories that, obviously I don't want to go into all the stories now, but
right.
I've heard many, many stories that sort of add credence to the nature of animals and the gift they bring to us.
That's great. So you'll have something else coming out at some point that will share the stories of other people?
That's my aim, and people listening to that have stories of their own. I'd love to hear from them.
Great. Well, I have your Facebook page information and your Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as the Soul Dog book website. So I suppose people can reach out to you on your social media if they have a story.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this. It's something that's new to me. I'm not an animal owner, not for a long time. I used to have a dog and a cat in the past, but I'm kind of independent now, and I like to travel around without limitations, so I choose not to have a pet. But I know how important animals can be in people's lives. And even when I've visited people, I have a friend who I sat kind of with the dog, their dog, at home alone sometimes while they would go out to work when I was in Europe. And I don't remember why I was upset about something, and their dog just knew. It was like on my lap, and like almost like, what's the matter? Let me help you.
Well, they're pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well,
It's been a pleasure. I mean, I really love talking to you.
Thank you for taking the time again. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have something to look forward to in a few months, a year or so. And
at least a year.
Okay. Well, we look forward to hearing more from you as far as this topic goes.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Okay. Thank you.